Cubans are rising up like never before. In this video, we're going to take a look at the absolutely unprecedented protests that took place over the weekend. We're going to go over the completely lame and ridiculous excuse given by the Bumblin Biden administration for the mass revolt. And stick with me to the end because we're going to see exactly how this backlash involves nothing less than the rising up of a new worldwide political order. You are not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. I am your daily fake news antidote. As each and every day we provide patriotic analysis to help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. Before we begin, let's give a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video, and that's BioTrust and their awesome immune system supporting product, Ageless Body. Ageless Body combines 5 of the world's best immune supporting powerhouses to boost your immune system like nothing else. And best of all, if you click on that link below today, you're going to get Ageless Body at their lowest price ever, 51% off with free US shipping to boot. So don't wait, click on that link or go to agewithsteveturley.com. All right, gang, let's dive right in there. We're seeing nothing less than the single greatest anti-government protest that has ever arisen in communist Cuba, period. Tens of thousands of Cubans took to the streets on Sunday in protest of their nation's food shortages and skyrocketing inflation. Communist Cuba has been suffering one of their worst economic crises in decades. Towns across the country have been plagued with power outages. Coronavirus cases are an all-time high. It's just a perfect storm for mass revolt, and that's exactly what we're seeing. Even policemen are siding with the people and actively protesting their communist government. The communist government has itself reportedly responded by shutting off the nation's internet service. And this is because they're blaming not just the United States for the huge uprising, but they're particularly blaming social media for promoting political instability. And they're calling on all faithful Marxist revolutionaries to stand up against the uprising. All this is more and more protesters are demanding that the country's communist dictatorship immediately resign. So what's going on here? What is happening in Cuba? Well, if you're the Bumblin Biden administration, you're going to chalk it all up to COVID fatigue. That's it. That's right, people. People are just sick and tired of COVID. Yeah. And so they're rising up in the single largest revolt against a communist dictatorship in the island's history. Yeah, it's all because, COVID fatigue. Others are noting that more and more Cubans are deliberately rejecting Marxist socialism right at the same time that, ironically, we here in the States are starting to embrace it. And the argument here is that Cubans have seen and experienced the ravaging effects of Marxism and instead are choosing democracy over communism. But I think something deeper is happening here. I think what's happening in Cuba is even more deep than an ideological conversion where people are chucking one ideology for another. And I certainly think that there's far more going on than Bumblin Biden's notion that Cubans are merely concerned about rising COVID cases and restrictions. I think what's happening in Cuba, right before our very eyes, is the latest in the continuous crack up of the old Cold War political order and the rising up of a new one. A worldwide political order that's redefining politics and nationhood for the foreseeable future. So let's unpack that a bit. Believe it or not, scholars have been predicting something like this for decades, particularly after the Soviet Union fell on Christmas Day, 1991. Now, if you remember, there were a number of scholars who believed that with the fall of the Soviet Union, we had reached an era that Francis Fukuyama called the end of history. And what he meant by that is that for centuries, the world was looking for the single best political and economic system available. And we tried all these different options. But now, with the death of the Soviet Union, the world had finally arrived at a consensus. And that consensus is that Western liberal globalism was the single best political system imaginable and was thus the standard bearer for a truly worldwide modern society. But right around the same time, there were a number of other scholars, such as Sam Huntington of Harvard, who were highly skeptical of such a bold pronouncement. Huntington believed that what happened with the breakup of the Soviet Union and then the the violent balkanization of Yugoslavia that followed, he believed that that was going to happen to the entire Western liberal globalist order. In other words, the breakup of the Soviet Union was indicative of a much larger crackup. And that's the entire world political order that was built over the last century on the decaying foundations of modernity. Now, what these scholars like Sam Huntington recognized was two things. One, that the Western liberal globalist order was built on the philosophical foundations of modernity. And two, those philosophical foundations have collapsed in the hearts and minds of the vast majority of Western populations. Now, you may recall from a history class back in your day that modernity or modernism was found in what's called the Enlightenment and the so-called scientific revolution, right? So this is the 18th century European belief that science and scientific rationalism was the one true way of understanding the world for all people's times and places. So scientific rationalism was viewed as the one-size-fits-all way of knowing the world for everyone. If you disagreed with that vision, if you believed that your superstitions, particularly your religious superstitions, were more important than scientific rationality, then you were by definition a savage, right? You're primitive. You're still living in the dark ages. You, my friend, are a Neanderthal. And so modernity gave birth to the three major political, economic, and cultural systems that dominated the 20th century. Modernity gave us liberalism, it gave us communism, and it gave us fascism. Liberal democracy was touted as the one-size-fits-all political system. Communism was touted as the one-size-fits-all economic system, right? And fascism was touted as the one-size-fits-all cultural and bioethno system. Now, of course, World War II took care of fascism. So the ensuing years became a standoff between the other two modernist systems. And with the fall of the Soviet Union on Christmas Day 1991, ideologues like Francis Fukuyama told us that we had reached the end of history, that liberal globalism won the battle of modern ideologies. Easy peasy, right? There were three major modernist alternatives, and liberal globalism won the day. The problem with this end of history notion is that it failed to realize that it wasn't so much communism that had died with the fall of the Soviet Union, but rather the real victim was modernity itself. You see, the problem we're facing today in the 21st century is that no one believes that scientific rationalism is the one true way of understanding reality anymore. Populations are what we now call postmodern. They're no longer modern in the strict philosophical sense. It was the scholar Francis Lyotard who recognized by the late 70s that Western populations had largely abandoned the modern myth, this modernist enthronement of scientific rationalism as the one-size-fits-all way of knowing the world. And this abandonment has only increased over the last decades. And so what are we seeing in Cuba? What's the same thing we've been seeing with Brexit. It's the same thing we're seeing with the rise of Trump. It's the same thing we're seeing in India and Brazil and Hungary and Poland and Russia and Eastern Europe. More and more populations are rising up and they're pushing back against modernist globalist political and economic systems that no longer make sense in a postmodern world. And in many respects, what's happening in Cuba is as simple as that. It's all part of a collapsing world order that no longer makes sense in the 21st century. Now, this is wonderful news for all of us who despise the Marxist ideologues that have taken over our permanent political class and the mainstream media and our woke corporate boardrooms. The uprising in Cuba is precisely what we're going to see more and more against our woke political and media and corporate elite. The uprising in Cuba is unprecedented for sure, but it's but the latest in a worldwide uprising that will indeed topple the world's globalist elite once and for all. Now, before you go, you'll definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on the Arizona audit. What if it turns out that Trump won? What then? Well, that's what we get into this video that you are not going to want to miss. So make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.